Welcome to the Product Quest podcast. Thanks for joining us on our journey to better understand innovation and product strategy. My name is Scott Burleson, and joining me as always, my co-hosts Jan Vermouth and Jonathan Edwards. Today's show is brought to you by salesprep.com. Product managers and salespeople have one thing in common. They need voice of the customer skills to conduct customer interviews. Go to salesprep.com and learn VOC. You can take e-learning courses, get resources, and practice interviewing with Claire, your personal AI-powered VOC coach. Try it out for free at salesprep.com. Today's, we welcome our special guest, Jeff Baker. Jeff is president of IGI Group Consulting, standing for Insight for Growth and Innovation, a firm that uses jobs to be done and other research methods to help firms grow and thrive. Jeff and I worked together some years ago when we both worked for Strategyn. Strategyn is ground zero for outcome-driven innovation, which is a proven system for applied jobs to be done. Jeff has been a steady contributor to the world of jobs to be done for quite a few years now. Jeff, it's just fantastic to reconnect. I know we have a lot to talk about. Welcome to the Product Quest podcast.
Hey, thanks, guys. I'm really happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
Well, let's start. How did you originally learn about jobs to be done? Let's start there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, boy, you know what? It's been a full 20 years. It struck me really hard when I had to think back to that. But yeah, it's been a full 20 years. I was at Microsoft. I was working in a centralized market research group. I was a research manager, primarily supporting our mobile entertainment embedded devices product division. But because we were a centralized group, we had grown pretty dramatically from, I don't know, maybe 30 people to nearly 100 people, 100 full-time researchers. And we were spending, close to like $90 million a year in market research. And that was the bulk of what the company spent, but not even all of it. And so we were like, hey, isn't this great? And then we sat back and we're like, well, we're sort of becoming a big target. Are we really delivering the value that we should to the organization? And so we sort of set upon this self-assessment and exploration exercise. And what we determined by analyzing all the work we had done and the time that we'd spent over the past couple of years is that we had spent way more time and money, what we ultimately ended up referring to as counting things, after all the important decisions had already been made. And that while that work was good work, that at the same time, what we saw for the first time, I think ever, was sort of some indications on the product side at Microsoft of some cracks starting to develop, right? Because at that stage of the game, there'd been essentially nothing but runaway success. And what we started seeing was a couple of instances of like product teams, not small product teams, like big product teams. They get like 6 months into a product plan after developing like this elaborate vision document and everything. And then they would like raise their heads and they would say, well, no, why are we doing this again? And we also saw for the first time ever a couple of product launches that were much less successful than prior versions. And so it just sort of hinted that, okay, maybe what we need to do is to put some focus on serving the development side of the business a little bit better with some new type of methodology, some new approach. And this was all in the context of a holistic best practices approach that we decided to embark on. Because one of the other things that we recognized as a research organization that was centralized and then farmed out to the different product units was that we were essentially not being as proactive as we thought was necessary in getting the right types of research done. And that was part of what was contributing to the problem, counting a lot of things after all the decisions had been made. And so we came up with this framework. I did not do it alone. I was just spearheading the effort, basically corralling a lot of brilliant minds around me. And we came up with this sort of strategic framework that says, okay, throughout the product cycle, every business has to answer a small set of essential questions and know the answer in order to be successful. And then we developed research best practices around each one of those questions. And the second question on that list was, what do people do and want? And so that's the nature of the questions. They were very high level. They were not research speak. They were just very pragmatic questions. And that led me to ending up being tasked with finding some sort of best practice research methodology that aligned to that question. And that is the genesis of finding jobs to be done and then finding Strategyn. And we went through a whole vetting process on all of the 8 questions. We went through about a 6-month vetting process of different methods. And so for what we ultimately ended up calling the habits and practices discipline, we chose Strategyn as the best practice. And that started a period of, I would say, maybe 4 years or so, where I ended up being sort of the internal guru and working with Strategyn with different business units all across the company, on all kinds of different projects, different audiences, basically seeing how bulletproof this approach really was. And I think we got up to about 40 projects, nearly 40 projects over that period. And so that made it a really unique experience too, because I think to date, that is still the largest client Strategyn's ever had. So we learned a lot together, and that was a lot of fun. And ultimately, I just fell in love with it so much that I left the mothership after, like, I had been in and out of Microsoft a couple of times already by that point. And I just said, I want to focus more time on doing this innovation stuff. And part of that was that because I was approaching it from the position of a research manager, I was so naive in thinking that, well, hey, the job is actually done. I've come up with the right methodology. Now all the product units are just going to adopt this, and they're just going to be a flying success, right? And I almost had no idea that there was this whole other discipline of innovation management that I had just stepped into, and that was just totally fascinating to do. So that was how I first came across Tony and Strategyn.
That's excellent. 40 projects. Jeff, I think
Yeah.
with $90 million, I think I could understand customer needs, at least have a,
I hear you.
I think I could do a little bit of work with that.
I hear you. And so literally what we did was over the course of that 4 years, we kept doing the same sort of synthesis exercise at the end of the year of all the money that had been spent against each of those essential questions that I described earlier. And we found that progressively more and more money was being spent farther and farther upstream at the beginning of the product cycle. And so it was really a nice success. It really was. And I look back on it, and it's still a highlight moment for me, because that whole exercise that we went through, that was not the first time that Microsoft had tried to accomplish that. It was like the second or third time. And it had failed previously for some of the reasons that we've kind of been hinting at. Is like the organization was really resource rich. Anybody could basically do anything they wanted. It was really autonomous, so anybody could really do anything they wanted.
Yeah.
And it was just filled with incredibly smart people who were really, really challenging to convince that there is one best way to do something. And so the whole idea of getting everyone on board with a set of methodologies was really a massive challenge. And that's why it had failed before. But we got that across the finish line, and it really made a big difference. And not only in the type of work that we did, but it helped us achieve another objective, which was to change the dynamic of the relationship between the research function and the development teams, the marketing teams, and to an important, maybe a little bit lesser extent, but also to the user experience team, because those guys were all seated over in the engineering teams. And so they actually had the closest ear to all of those guys. So up until this point, the research function and the user experience function were kind of at odds, which makes no sense at all. But they were kind of competing for the same level of attention. And as part of this process, I was able to clarify, okay, here's how we should be working together. Here's how our methodologies trade off from one another over time across the development cycle. And it was really successful.
You know, I think one of the big lessons from that, and especially if you've worked with clients and, trying to help them, is just the big stroke, the big commitment. Because what happens much more often is a company says, hey, I'm going to do this one project. I'll call it a pilot. I'll study this market, and essentially I'll evaluate this process based on that. But then just because you study a market, that doesn't create unhappy customers there. You're not creating anything. And so And so if you don't find this amazing opportunity, then there's a lot of leaders, they look on that as a failure. But it's like
Yeah,
you're digging treasure, you dig in one place in the yard, well, there's no gold here, therefore there's no gold anywhere. And
right,
this digging is a failed process.
right.
But by
Big waste
doing
of time. Right, right. Well, I'll tell you what. Um, that is one of the pluses of our decision to push pretty hard in saying this is the way to do it,
yeah,
because everyone, there were like half a dozen groups at a time, maybe, that were all doing this process or in short, compressed time frame. And so our learning was dramatically accelerated. If we
yeah,
had come to the table and said, "Oh yeah, here's three best practices to choose from. Go
yeah,
ahead and do whatever you want,"
yeah,
then our learning would have been slowed down so much.
yeah,
So that is probably the strongest rationale for why, sort of being a little hardcore, as hardcore as you can get away with, at least in certain areas. Because I am not a methodologist at all, right? When it comes to research, I'm not super hardcore about things. I'm much more of a pragmatist and a strategist. And so it was actually a little bit uncomfortable because this one area, this habits and practices with the jobs to be done, this was the one area where we were the strongest in saying we need to do it this way.
yeah,
Other areas within the framework, we were a little more flexible. But this one, I'm glad we weren't, because, like I say, it just dramatically accelerated our learning. And it also got a lot of people talking in the same language. And that
yeah,
started to become really powerful. It starts out super slow,
yeah,
but it gathers momentum and makes a difference.
yeah. Jan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering. I can hear a couple of kind of UX or other researchers in the back of my mind who would love to somehow gain this position that product or other people in the organization basically finally listen to them and so can you give a little
Yeah,
bit of insight on how did you get that kind of buy-in from the other parts of the organization such that they would follow more or less or whatever, but that framework? Because in my experience, quite often research has they have no leverage.
yeah,
Or very little. So they annoy
right.
kind of product and PMs when they say, "Hey, well, so how did you get that across
I
the
got
board?"
you. Yeah, it was a combination thing. So number one, it was coming to the table with a perspective. That was like one of the biggest changes
Yeah,
in the dynamic, because up until then, while this wasn't universally true by any means, but the worst case scenario is your research representative to that product group X is thought of as an order taker. And you pick them up
yes,
once you know you have a problem that you don't know how to solve. Whereas when we created the strategic framework, we actually came to the table with, the director and VP level and above at a product unit and said, "Hey, if you guys aren't answering these questions, you're not doing your job." And now, of course, we didn't say it like that, but essentially, like, these are
in
essential
some other
questions.
words, but
These are essential questions for a reason. So if you're not
yeah,
comfortable with your ability to answer them, then we should talk about what your research priorities are and allocating the amount of funds necessary to do that. That was the big one.
yeah,
The other was that, we spent 6 months. We had some credibility, right? We're a team of, 75, 80 research professionals. We've spent 6 months scouring the landscape for best practices. We've evaluated different things, and these are the ones we've chosen. And that carried some credibility,
yeah,
especially when, in the case of like the jobs to be done, the the competing thing was often development teams having engineers going out and talking to a few current customers and trying to use that as their basis for deciding what they should go do, right? Not exclusively, of course, but certainly the things that the engineering team were doing was either that, or they were relying on the projects that their UX team decided to do, which in some cases were very useful, but also like super discreet and tactical almost
yeah,
always,
yeah,
right? Compared to what we were doing, which is saying, "Hey, we're coming to the table with sort of a strategic landscape for you to go attack." The other thing that we did, particularly in this regard, more so than with the marketing related stuff, a little bit there too, but basically what we said was, we're not coming to you with a methodology that tells you what to do. We're
yeah,
not doing that. And that's, something that we might end up talking about later, but I think is really unique about jobs to be done is it doesn't tell people, here is the answer, go build this. Because
yeah,
what developers want to do and probably all engineers, they want to exercise that creativity that brought them to engineering in the first place. And that's where they get a lot of juice. And so when you tell them, hey, all we're doing is we're providing you with some guardrails so that you know that the stuff you end up working on is going to be valued by customers. And I remember that we actually did a project with software developers, both internally and externally. And that was one of the number one takeaways is like, hey, I want to be able to express my creativity, but I want what I do to actually matter and have an effect. I don't want to feel like I'm wasting my time or other people's time. And ultimately that became more important than the sense of autonomy and freedom to do whatever the heck they want. Right? Yeah. And so it really helped to sort of corral that innovative creativity and invention within some guardrails so that they felt like, okay, this is what we should be working on.
Yeah, I can second that completely. I've had different experiences with exactly this happening, that people don't want engineers, want to be creative. They want to be able to express their talent, and they don't want to just follow a backlog that's program this feature and this feature. They want to be able to decide that on their own. And I think if you get them on your side, I could imagine it's much easier then to convince the rest of the organization. So start with the engineers, an interesting approach.
Yep.
I think a big thing though too, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, is it's a pretty big standard to say this is the best process ever created. That's not even the right question. The question is it good enough and does it work? And if it's good enough and works, that's good enough and it works. And you're better off being committed to something that's good enough than works than half-ass committed to this or that or the other, or sort of be holding out for this utopia thing. I remember there was an article, I believe it was a New York Times article. It was a very high publicized article criticizing Clay Christensen. And this goes back maybe 12, 13 years and just ripping into these theories of disruption. And I remember reading that and going, well, that's a hell of a high standard that somebody has to come up with something that solves I almost said a bad word, every freaking problem in the world. How nice that you can sit there on your computer and try to tear down somebody that has substantially contributed to innovation thinking and marketing thinking in a way that's really many practical people have found helpful. And you're essentially your complaint is it's not good enough as compared to what, And so I think coming back to ODI, one thing that's interesting is those of us that practitioners and work with Strategyn, I think the same thing that attracts us to it is like so methodical. It also, we can't help ourselves but to want to try to improve it. And I'm not sure about this rule. I'm not sure about that rule. But and I think those are healthy things to do and challenge and improve it. But we also, I think, have to recognize some 2 decades, 25 years later that it's the reason it's so stable is because it is good enough and it works. And it is when I even look at this, like my own, and again, if we were having a beer, we could say, well, I don't know about this and I don't know about that. And we could sort of do that, pick at it. But at the end of the day, first of all, if that wasn't our starting point, we wouldn't even be thinking at this high level. We wouldn't even, because we're building on those ideas of Tony's. But then I think even just as it's written and what customers want, and I know Tony's evolved it a little bit over the years. But that book's almost 20 years old now. But its staying power, I do think, is a testament. I think those are the thresholds. Not is it like perfect, like this crazy lady writing for the New York Times. But is it useful and practical? And this, I'm reminded of this as you describe rolling it out into Microsoft, and you said, "Hey, I'm not a methodology guy." But I sensed that you felt it was good enough and worked. And the great success, I think, was from having a big commitment to it instead of like sort of halfway in, halfway out.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, the whole topic of best practices, it really there's so many nuances to it. Like as the moment you define or declare this is a best practice, people are incented to dig at it, right? And especially when you're surrounded by super smart people, that they're really good at that. So I ended up literally developing an entire separate PowerPoint presentation just for objection handling. And I distinctly remember this one chart that I ended up developing out of just frustration and desperation. It was a chart that mapped the emotional roller coaster that a team was going to go through in one of these projects, just so that they could recognize it up front.
Nice.
And it actually was really, that was a whole part of my expectation setting exercise to get people comfortable with doing this, because there are definitely parts the first couple of times through that are uncomfortable. Yeah. And so just letting them know that in advance was hugely valuable. But the other thing that's related to that, I think, is that when you think about the reward systems inside of companies, there's almost no reward for consistent, excellent execution of a good idea. It's like, it's all just like you were saying, so it's like, come up with some tweak that's a little better, or come up with something that's new. And I think that kernel of thought is really behind a lot of problems that enterprises have with any sort of sustained knowledge building and excellence and consistency, just because of the incentive system. It's not there, right? The other thing I wanted to mention about the best practice is that immediately I got the response of, well, clearly, and these were from people who were kind of sold on it. They're like, clearly this is like the Cadillac version of how to think about customer needs. But what do we do with product teams that can't afford the Cadillac? And sadly, that immediately became a challenge before I felt like we'd even gone through the complete wave one of projects to assess how well this really works. And I think that because it is so precise and so rigorous, that is a persistent problem, right? Not everyone has the money, the time, or the patience for that level of rigor. So how do you get around that? That's a long-term persistent problem.
How do you get around that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Over the years, I've thought of all kinds of things. So first and foremost, I remember back when we were doing the first projects and we got a handle on how long the quantitative instruments were. That seemed like, okay, let's obviously work on that. How can we minimize the burden of taking the survey? And we did a bunch of experimentation with different formatting and structure. And I think some of those things still persist today in how Strategyn, lays things out and organizes their surveys. But the other thing was, like, after years later, I was like, what if we just captured measurements on the overall job and the job steps? What if we just could identify, like, which job step is the biggest pain point right now? Like, how far could a development team reasonably get with just that information? And then maybe as like a phase 2, you could say, okay, let's go study these 3 job steps in depth. And yes, we're going to miss some things, but if that's all we can do, that's all we can do. Something like that. But it's like at every stage when you do something like that, you're making this fork in the road between being completely robust and thorough and good enough. And I've always struggled with feeling like that would work. But I did that 2 times. I remember I did that at NetJets years later, and it worked really well but it happened to be in the right circumstance. It wasn't in something that was particularly unique. It was more part of the customer experience. And so once we identified, hey, this is an unmet need relative to other things on the spectrum, then, well, we don't even necessarily need to go find the outcomes and quantify them. All we need to do is look at this topic area, this domain, go external and look for best practices of people who are obviously doing it better than we are and just copy that. Right. So sometimes you can get away with something as pragmatic as that. But to actually substitute something for the level of detail of outcomes, I've never even gotten close to finding a substitute for that. I just don't think there is.
Yeah. Our common friend we have, Sandy Bates, I remember her being an advocate of what you're referring to. Do the survey at the job step and then follow up with a qualitative just to go deeper. All right, now what's problematic about that job step without another quant? So you would you would count on So depending on what you do, there's some trade-off there, right? But
Yeah. Oh,
but
yeah.
I always like that idea. And as I get older, I just become a bigger believer in qualitative in general. Um, and it's always a funny. We've had a couple people on here that one was a jobs to be done practitioner, and another one was not, just more of a traditional qualitative researcher. But their whole practice was qualitative only, and I found that very
Yeah.
interesting. And if you've done qualitative like you have and I have,
Yeah.
you look, if you learn something in the survey it shouldn't be a surprise. It should confirm what you already heard, which is to say, well,
Yeah.
did you even need to do the quant at all? And I think it's just a matter. I don't know. I won't say what I think. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
about that? About just purely qualitative type work
Yeah.
and stressing
I
that?
do think that comes up a little bit short. Um, I say that even though, I'm getting up there now. I've been doing research for a long time. And I did realize like a point in my career, probably not until I had been doing and watching research for 20 years, where I could actually sit and listen to someone speak and have a really solid understanding of what the problem was and what a likely solution might be. And it's almost like it's hard to describe even, but you sort of reach this like meta level of interpretation that a more junior person could never do. And
Yeah.
that's not a knock on more junior people. It's just the way that once you've been exposed to people saying things for years and years, you get to better at, I guess, reading between the lines. And so it definitely decreases the need for quantification. But given the complexity of a lot of the products and categories where jobs to be done makes the most sense, I don't think that you could get away with trying a qual only thing. That seems a little too much of a compromise to me.
Yeah, the challenge is the researcher becomes the measurement tool, and that's a lot of pressure. If
Oh
you do a
yeah,
survey, you can say, and you're presenting the results, you say, this is what your customer said, and it's completely separate from me. If you're presenting the qualitative as things, you're saying, here's what I heard, here's my
right.
interpretation. And
Yeah,
that's just, I mean, it's a different conversation. You're asking them to
yeah,
trust you, but as with, like you correctly say, as an experienced researcher, I don't think it's a false sense of confidence. I think it's real. I think you
yeah,
are able to, but the problem is it's not a repeatable process. It's like
yeah,
you can't say,
yeah.
but something that's interesting though, and I'm sure you've run into this as well. A lot of folks that want to hire us for research, they're not even thinking quantitative anything. I want you to do a voice of the customer project for me, and all they
Yeah,
mean are interviews. They're not, and
yeah,
so I've found myself either trying to sell them on the value of a survey, but then I'm
Mhm.
like, what am I doing this for? Because the survey, it's a lot of work. It's a
Yeah,
lot of data analysis. There's a lot of it's really a pain in the butt recruiting and making sure you got your
yeah,
quotas. It's a lot of work, and it's I'll just say it. The margin is probably not as high on that.
yeah.
Certainly, this
Oh,
way, what
It's
you
not where
make,
you make the money.
the
Yeah.
money
yeah,
you make versus the pain in the ass it is is
Yeah.
is uh,
oh
is
yeah,
not as attractive for quantitative.
Yeah.
yeah. No
So
doubt.
I find that, like, I often find myself with one of my clients, they don't want quantitative. I particularly don't enjoy it as much. Like, why am I beating myself? Why not just give them what they want?
Yeah,
But I can't help but I can't just, I don't know. As you can see, I sort of struggle with it, but that was very
yeah.
insightful.
But
I
I
think
feel like
go ahead, Jan.
it I mean, it really depends on, for me, it depends on two things. Like, who are you as a company? I mean, we work quite a lot with startups, and
Yeah.
I mean, a
Yeah.
startup neither has money nor time. So what there already helps is just a shift of perspective. Get away from your technology and just understand there is
Hmm.
a job. And then maybe we can do even an internal assessment and say,
Yeah.
hey, it's probably these 3 steps that are an issue. Maybe we're wrong, but it's good enough for now, right? And then 6 months later, we'll see if you're still here. And then
Right.
so that really depends. And then the other question is, I mean, what's the investment later on, right? So, I mean, we work quite often in med tech companies or in pharma companies, and you say, well, we want to go for FDA approval and blah, blah, blah. that's a couple of millions there already spent with before anything happens. So yes, a quant it takes time, takes money. There is a lot of subtlety to get it right. But if afterwards you're spending millions, 10 or even more, just before the product even hits the market, you better be quite sure what you're aiming for.
Yeah.
So I try to, if you anchor it there as compared to kind of research, then that's a different question. So if you invest,
that's so true. That has ended up being the thing that I go to the most when I'm talking about what kind of investment in insights and research projects makes sense, is just to look at how much are you about to spend on this development team of what, 10, 20, 30 people working for the next 2 years, right? Even if they're only like 10% wrong in what they're doing, you've more than paid for the research that you would have done at the beginning, right? So it's pretty, to me, it's staggering that more people don't actually think about it this way. But even though it's a hard cost up front, research is just dirt cheap compared to what you're about to spend in hidden costs throughout the cycle that comes after this early stage research. So, gosh, just really cheap, I think.
I have an opinion that is not supported by any research anywhere. It's just an opinion, to take it for what it's worth. But here's what it is. So you're talking about the money, but another of the thing is we don't have time to do the research. We got to go. We got to launch in next summer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
And so they'll say, I don't want to do the research because we don't have time. And here's my opinion that's not backed by any study whatsoever, is that actually, if you do the research, it will take less time. And here's why. It's because once you start development is a series of decisions. Oh, we're at a fork of the road. We're going to do this or we're going to do this. Now we have to talk about that. We have to discuss it. We have to have all this conversation. And let's say we decide A versus B, we go down path B. Well, what happens is 4 months goes by and someone calls a meeting and goes, I'm not sure about that, guys. I think customers really more it's about path A. All right, let's have a meeting. Let's talk about it. Put path B on pause and we talk about it. And maybe we reverse course and we say, no, A is the bigger problem. Maybe we keep going, but regardless, it's all the what good quant does is it just gives us more certainty, so that even if again similar to like the process, even if we're not committed to the absolute best path, we're committed to a good path that will work, and we don't have to make decisions and remake them and unmake them and freaking talk about them and meeting everyone. So I have no idea if that's 100%. But that's my opinion.
I think that's a great point. Let me add a couple of anecdotes onto the pile of evidence for you. So, like I started off early saying, we started at Microsoft, we started seeing development teams really struggle in this same regard. Yeah. And I distinctly remember a team that had been working for 12 months and they totally started over. And it's like, what's the cost of that? But the other thing too is, I don't know if you guys will remember this. I remember it clearly and painfully. Like back in the day, there was this saying in the tech world, don't buy anything till version 3.
Oh yeah.
You guys remember that? Yeah. And I hate to say, I'm not sure this was only a Microsoft thing, but I know it was a Microsoft thing. It was almost like a joke. Don't buy it till version 3. How much does that cost? Right. I mean, it's just millions and millions of dollars. Right. Think about it, of wasted development time, wasted marketing that nobody's paying attention to. Yeah. I mean, it's just a mountain of money that is wasted if you get to that point where that is the thought in your customer's mind.
Yeah. But a good thing we saved that 7 weeks doing a survey.
Exactly.
Good thing we saved that. Yeah, it's like this thing about time is again, this is not supported by any research, just opinion, but if I don't think ultimately customers ever punish us that much for launching something late, or what we perceive as late by some arbitrary deadline. They punish you from launching something bad, for something that's terrible. And they'll never forget it. Like they'll never, you only get like that one chance, that first impression, that trite saying.
I always quote the great philosopher Gordon Ramsay on this, who always said, people will wait for good food.
People will wait for good food.
But, I mean, you will wait in a good restaurant. You will wait. Yeah. I mean, it can take long. It's annoying, But when the food's great, you'll have a good memory. But if it comes fast and it's bad, you will never go there again.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's just a
Yeah.
But I think I would
core
like
idea.
to bring up a topic that we've brushed upon quite a few times, which is I think there is a balance to achieve between how much of the research you do and how much do you actually go and actually produce something, because there's a certain amount of learning that you can get from producing something that is very, very hard to produce upfront. And I refer back always to this talk we had with the oh, his name escapes me now. It was in
Jan?
it doesn't matter. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Jan Schmidt.
Exactly. So this idea of co-evolving solution and problems, which is a bit the designer approach and often a criticism that's made towards jobs to be done. I would say that it's too much upfront. And I think there is some validity to this. And I wondered what your experience was with that in terms of, you can also go too far in analysis, right?
Yes.
Analysis paralysis.
Yeah. Oh, of course you can.
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
I think this is the classic problem of ordering, right? I think that I've never found a rationale for a team to just start working on what they imagine is the best thing for the customer. I think that you have to have some stake in the ground from the customer point of view that says this is really where the unmet need is. And then right after that is when you start doing exactly what you're suggesting, which is in as short of, what do they call them these days? In as short of a sprint as possible, develop something, get some feedback on it, and do that iteratively until you're done developing. I think that they complement each other. They don't really conflict with each other, because I just think that the, shooting before aiming approach completely, I think that's irresponsible, because the likelihood of success is so much lower if you do that. And you don't know what problem you're really trying to solve. So I do think that is the right order. But, and I also think there's one other thing that we did at Microsoft. And again, this was in the days before you could just post stuff every month and get feedback on it in real time. So we would go through a whole development cycle, a year, 2 years, and then we would get to the end, and we would actually not do any more research. We would just say, okay, let's launch the product. And I said, well, how do we know that what we have actually built lives up to what we envision? And yeah, of course, they're doing, beta testing and stuff like that throughout the process, but that's not the same thing. And so we actually introduced sort of a hard pre-launch step that we called not product concept testing, but product readiness testing. Like, is this product actually ready to launch from a customer perspective? Because frankly, like in my experience, there's very few fail-safe systems in place at companies to make that decision. And because there's so much momentum and anticipation that builds to that point, that raising a flag and saying this is not a launchable product is incredibly hard. And, doing a piece of research at that phase can take a lot of pressure off of individuals to just say, I don't think this product is ready to launch. And so we did start doing that. That's a little bit of a different pivot from the, iterative ongoing work, like the co-development. But the point is the same, is that you do need to have the right sort of stages where you're sure it's time to move forward. Right. And so I think at the beginning and the end of the development cycle are two of those spots.
And you bring up concept testing, and I think that's a great place well, when you're doing concept testing, which is just using outcomes. I mean, those are the criteria that you judge your concept against.
Yes.
Like there's certain examples we would always give and explaining ODI. One of them was the job of prepare a meal. So let's say one of your outcome statements was minimize the likelihood of burning the meal or something. Well, when you're concept testing your oven or whatever, all right, how well does it do that? And you have these, and you can measure it. First of all, you internally, how well do we think this new oven or whatever reduces the likelihood of burning the meal? Now have customers do it. How well are they able to use it and also achieve it? If you don't have those criteria, all you can do is just sort of shove the oven at somebody and say, how do you like it?
Yeah.
You like it?
Exactly.
I like it.
How do you like this
We've
feature?
been working on it.
I know.
So having having those outcomes or criteria, now you have it gives structure to your concept testing. Otherwise, honestly, it becomes very much a box checking. We have the concept test before we pass this gate, and it's just how much do you like our product? Guess what? Every time you're going to say it, they're going to tell you they like it. Basically,
Well, that's why you need to ask people to buy it. That's one of the the obvious things that you want people to actually put their money where their mouth is, right?
Right. And the thing is, and that's the classic question that shows, the limitations of interviews or survey research is because people, the way they behave is not the way they answer that question. So even that has limits, even though you still need to do it. But I remember like how many hours we would spend like figuring out what's the discount factor we're going to apply when 70% of people said they're very likely to purchase. What does that really mean? Does that mean 20% would actually purchase? Or so the point that I really wanted to make, Scott, was on what you said, is that I think that is one of the most underutilized aspects of jobs to be done and ODI is the value of coming up with all of those attribute statements that can be reused multiple times down the product cycle. Right. I cannot believe, and I kind of, it's almost like I kind of blame the more traditional research community for this, because they have not really picked up on this. It's, jobs to be done is still the sort of the domain of product advocates and innovation. And I don't think that, the only reason I realized it so early is because I happened to be doing this end-to-end best practices exercise when I first discovered jobs to be done. And I realized, well, wait a minute, we just take that attribute, plop it into the concept. In fact, I said, we don't even need to do concept tests anymore. We already know what the concept needs to be based on the jobs to be done work. What we need to do is that concept readiness thing, but that's where we use the attributes and say, is it satisfying this outcome statement or this job statement, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can keep doing that further downstream. Like all of the exploratory messaging research we used to do. I'm like, dude, it's right here.
That's right.
It's right here in the outcome statements, the job steps, the emotional jobs, the social jobs. It's all right. All of your raw materials are already right there. So we can skip literally, we would spend $150,000 at a drop doing exploratory messaging research for this product launch. I'm like, we don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And the only thing you have to do is like that much more discrete level of campaign type of validation. Like, okay, did we pick the right words and did
that wording or this?
Right. And then, so it actually replaces a lot of research that you otherwise would have done a little bit downstream. And then even farther downstream, once you're in market and you're trying to measure product satisfaction, same exact attributes. How well is it allowing you to do this or avoid this, minimize it, whatever it is, you just drop those same attributes in the in-market research and it makes it much better. And it's a complete cycle and it's all using the same metrics essentially.
We don't talk about that.
That has not really taken off. It just hasn't. And I mean, I've tried to pitch Strategyn on this a couple of times. It's like, if you want to extend the length of your engagement with your customer, then all you got to do is offer this. You don't even have to promote it.
Yeah.
You don't even have to promote it, because I know I totally respect how Tony's like, I don't want to be a research company. I don't want people to think of us as a research company. I totally respect that. And that's why I'm saying you don't have to promote it. You can just say to your current customer who bought you as an innovation consultancy, say, once you get down to this step, if you'd like us to help you with this, we could do this. It's like, but it just hasn't taken off. And I have not figured out why, honestly.
Well, I can tell you at John Deere, as you well know, because you actually were one of the consultants on the work.
Yeah.
But it changed the way, it changed the copy on the website. It changed the copy in the A folders. You know how that process before that would work is there are these creative guys in the building and, they mostly kept to themselves and they'd come lumbering over to the product managers who might have been on their job, for 6 months. And basically, hey, with their pencil, what do we put on the website? What do we write about this thing? And they just sort of I'm not going to say they make it up. They sort of look at, well, we've got this much horsepower. We've got this much, we've got these features and that, and, and just whatever. But now if you've got those statements, it's like, it brings so much of, it's like, look, this is our thing. It does this. You can change your implements faster. You can do, you can do this. You can work at night. And you start even just thinking in terms of jobs, you're forcing yourself to say very functionally what this helps the customer do better and the criteria. And now for the creative person, you can go to them and say, hey, this new product, you can minimize the time to change the implement, or if you don't have to burden them with that, change the implement faster. Now Mr. or Ms. Creative person, it's your job to figure out what demos, or how do you what does that look like on the creative side? It just occurred to me, it's not that different than you take an outcome to an engineer and say, how do you solve this?
Oh, exactly.
Person, you bring them the outcome and you say, how do you communicate this? I've given you what to communicate. Now, as the creative person, you get to say how we communicate it.
Right. Yeah. It's just guardrails. Same exact concept. It's just guardrails.
Yeah.
And you're still letting them be creative. You're just not letting them go off the rails.
Yeah.
But in my experience, the engineers, as well as usually the communication guys, the marketing guys, they like this precision. It's especially it's the first time that somebody can tell them very precisely what the problem is. And engineers usually, in my experience, they love that. So we always try to kind of familiarize our results as much as we can within the company. And then people are always get skeptical. Or should we really talk to the engineers? And I think, you will see they will love it. And I mean, okay, it can always go wrong, but 9 times out of 10, they really like it. It's the first time somebody can pinpoint, it's these 5 things. Now go solve it. And they love it.
Yeah. The precision is awesome. The thing is, it's funny that you say, well, they're like, should we go talk to them? It's like, because I found that was one of the most essential things that you had to do early and often, because for better or worse, most other research exercises, the output is just so much more simple and direct, almost like telling them what the answer is. And so they're not really prepared for the level of depth that they're getting into with one of these projects. So the sooner you can acclimatize them to that, the better, because it takes mental energy. I'm sure you guys can remember, like Scott, I'm sure you can remember, like getting people to digest the quantitative results, and they're just looking at all of these attributes, and it's like, oh my God, it's overwhelming. Or even getting them to review them all before we go into quant. It's like they're just not ready for this. So the sooner you can acclimatize them to, here is the level of effort that it takes that goes along with, sort of like the responsibility that goes along with the benefit of having all this precision. It takes time, it takes emotional and mental energy that you got to put in, right? Yeah. Because otherwise you're not going to be able to do the gold at the very end of the process, which is another piece of sort of my expectation setting is, man, this is an exercise in translation, right? When we get done with this research, it's not going to say do A instead of B. Yeah. It's not going to do that. What it's going to do is it's going to show you this landscape of unmet needs, and then you get to actually apply your subject matter expertise and translate that into the right answer. But you got to be ready for that. And if you're not, then you're going to have a big surprise on your hands at the end of the project. And they're all going to look around in frustration and be like, yeah, we don't have time for all that. We got to get going. Right. And so that is one of the things that I ultimately learned, that like, you've got to get people on board with this stuff as early as possible, because the process, because everybody, for better or worse, most people who are not insights pros or research pros, to them, it's like all research is essentially the same, right? It's just, there's so little ability to tease out differences. And this is just dramatically different. And so if you hit them with it at the end, you're going to be sorry, because they're going to dismiss it. No matter how valuable it is, they'll just go, no, I'm rejecting this for all kinds of, human reasons. But,
you remind me of something. Jeff, I get real excited at the end of a qual. I mean, to me, like this list of needs, like well written. I mean, I could just like read them for my entertainment. I'm just so proud of this work. I'm like this. I mean, it's just like, because as you know, it's just like you're struggling over every word of that. Everything, it has been so carefully written. And when it's finally like, I feel good about this. I feel like this covers this space. And then what you remind me of is my clients don't necessarily share that enthusiasm. And it takes effort to get them to like, you want them to read it and understand, and
Yeah.
you want their stamp on it before they spend 200 whatever hundreds of thousands of dollars on the surveys and this and that, because you can't go undo it, you know.
Right.
I don't know if I have a question here as much as an observation. I guess I'll just start with that. Well, let's keep this on what we could do better. What could we do better so to get more engagement? Maybe that's the way to think about it.
Right. Well, let's see. Well, first of all, we've already covered one that I think is really big, which is we're not telling you what your job is. We're not trying to be engineers. We're not trying to be creatives. We're trying to provide you with some guardrails to help you narrow in on the things which, once you apply your expertise, you know you're working on something that matters. That is a really big one. The other one is, like I mentioned, just exposing them to examples of how much depth this is so that they are prepared and that they actually schedule time for it. That's what I find a lot of teams don't do. They don't schedule enough time to really dig in. So that, and then, like I mentioned earlier, just the emotional part of it, I think is really valuable to recognize, because people are going to go through this. You know, it's funny. It's almost like, I don't know how old the Gartner hype cycle is. You know, have you heard of the Gartner hype cycle around new technologies, right? It's like, it's very common now. I don't know how old that is, but after a certain number of years, I looked at my chart that I had built about the emotional roller coaster of an ODI project. And I thought, you know, that's very similar to the hype cycle of Gartner's new technology, because it's very similar. You know, people get all jazzed. They just hit this trough where it's like, oh my God, is this ever going to end? There's so much detail. I don't have time for this. And then it goes up from there and then levels off at some place that's higher than it was before they started, right? So I think that emotional element is really important. I also think there's one other thing that's not rocket science, but it's that the higher ups are expecting you to do something with it, right? It's the team has to understand that dismissing this is not an option.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of, you know, that's a much bigger issue about what is the role of the customer in our decision-making process, and are we going to honor it regardless of how hard it is? That means spend the money and the time to collect it and then understand what it means and act on it. And that is a much more cultural element. It's not limited to the scope of a particular project. But if you're coming in and just doing one project, then, you know, the earlier you understand that, the better, and you can take whatever mitigating steps that you can proactively do to address that. But yeah, it's a lot harder to work on those kind of things just on a one-off project basis.
I'm going to be laughing all day thinking about a customer saying, is this ever going to end?
Yeah. Well, so that's one other thing that I think that I encountered at Microsoft was, and it's sort of the double-edged sword of, you know, how great this is in terms of its depth and precision when you're decomposing a job and all of a sudden you're presenting, you know, 75, 100 different discrete statements of need. And like at a management level, they're going, holy shit, you mean I got to do this for every job? Yes. And so in that regard, it can be tremendously overwhelming. Right. And that's definitely an issue. Right. And that's why I don't know if I'm that much of an outlier on this or not, but I was always trying to advocate for doing just more jobs level exploration first. And I know, like from a consultant's perspective, that might not be the ideal, because I know Tony was always like, we have to give the engineers something to do at the end of this project, right? As opposed to me, I'm much more of a big picture strategist, and I want to understand the big landscape. I'm okay doing a preliminary phase where I just identify, are we even working in the right part of the landscape? I'm okay with that. And so I was always trying to advocate for that, whether you're doing, like I did a few just complete jobs studies where I would like look at, you know, a particular audience, like the head of IT or something, and just look at essentially you're decomposing their entire role of what their job is into a bunch of job statements and different domains. And that was pretty useful. But that has its own limitations because that's not a project that the development team is going to devour necessarily. That's the project that the strategist and the product planner might devour, but that's a precursor to figuring out where you want to go deep in a particular area on that landscape. But I think there's still value to do that because that gets away from this problem of saying, well, we're starting with this one very normally pretty discrete job.
Yeah.
And then towards the end, you have this question, well, how many times are we going to have to do this to address all of the meaningful jobs for our target audience? And oh, by the way, we've got 3 target audiences we care about. So it can be a bit overwhelming. And I think that's one of the challenges inherent to having this much precision.
Yeah. That definitely, there is a moment. It's like, wow, we have to do this for all these jobs we serve. Yeah. The other side of that, though, and I guess I shouldn't. Well, I guess I shouldn't mention this client's name, but is the longevity. There's a project, Jeff, that you did in around, let's say around 2007, and I happened to be visiting that client around 2018,
Oh,
and they were
okay.
still using the same data, and it was very stable, and it was very useful and helpful in their strategic planning and what. So they're using it, 10, 11, 12 years later.
Wow.
So I think that's also, as we're trying to explain the value of it, that's something that maybe it's not top of mind as much. And honestly, I don't know how much the clients care about that because they're I mean, as individuals, they're probably on to who knows what they're doing 12 years from now. But it's that certainly should be part of the value statement. There is the longevity of how much this is up.
And in some ways, it's a classic, different job executor question, right?
Yeah.
Because the core development team, they're working on this version. The planner and the business strategist, they're working on the 5 to 10 year plan, right? So it's just 2 different audiences almost too.
It is.
Yeah.
Let me throw a completely different question at you.
Yeah.
AI is a big thing. Lots of practitioners now, including me, are using AI as part of the qualitative effort. I'll just see for me personally. Well, before any project, I would always do a lot of secondary research. Let's just say, for example, it's a surgery type project. Well, there's tons written about it. It's like I never thought I was going to get some prize for interviewing the first surgeon without having done that first. It's like, why don't I get, Tony would say there's a finite number of needs. I feel like I'm doing the best. I'm doing the best. If my first interview, I have as many needs as possible before we even start. And I personally found AI to be a great solution, sort of the same thing I would use secondary research for. But are you using AI in your practice? And what are your thoughts of using AI as part of a qualitative effort?
I think it's pretty darn valuable. I just think that we have such a massive historical data, if you will, at our disposal now that you can cover a lot of ground before you actually talk to anyone.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I started out thinking, okay, well, at a minimum, we should be able to establish the job map and all its steps by just doing online research, even without AI, right? I mean, I can remember years ago, we first started, just like you said, let's do a secondary research review, do some web searching, and just pencil some stuff out, right? And now we can do that times 100. So I think there's a lot of value. And I think that it's still done best in the hands of experts who already know the underlying theory, which is probably the biggest risk of other people doing it and essentially misapplying it. But I do think that, I mean, it's just a massive pile of raw material that applies to a lot of current and future work. So I think that it can definitely replace, I mean, if I was trying to, set a benchmark for myself, I would say it could probably replace 75% of the qualitative that you used to do as interviews. But I would never want to say, I don't need to do anything.
Right.
Right. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
that number 75% is interesting. I'll tell you why. We just added an AI feature into our software, so you don't have to know the prompts. Basically, it creates a list of needs, and
Okay.
we've just, I won't say it's an extensive study, but we've gone back to clients and said, all right, what percentage of needs did it come up with? And it's virtually right the number you just threw out there,
I like that.
between up to 80%. They
So I had a thought experiment then. If we imagine AI becoming so good that it's 100%, I mean, it's never going to happen, but just for purpose of thinking about it,
Yeah.
that means that, and imagine a different company A and B could each type in some chat GPT version, give me all the needs on this, and they both get the same list.
Yeah.
How do we, I mean, is that all that's required then? I mean, what differentiates these companies then? Is it exclusively the quality of their engineers and how they're going, what kind of solutions they're going to build? Or is there some kind of element that we're still missing in the puzzle here?
Oh, well, from the product perspective, I would say that there's not just the quality of their implementation, but it's also which problems they decide to focus on, right? You could have a positioning strategy that led you to focus on one subset of the total list of needs versus some other positioning strategy that caused you to focus on another one. So I think there's pretty substantial differences that you could still end up with in terms of two competing products beyond just how good of the engineering is. But yeah, I mean, I think that it does make it a lot easier to level the playing field so that everybody knows which problems are out there to solve once you've done the AI stuff pretty quickly and easily, and then you've drudged through the quantitative phase that is, has its challenges, but is essential to figuring out what to focus on. But yeah, I still think there's a fair number of variables. And then of course, after that, you've got all the niceties of, your branding and marketing that would end up probably having some substantial impact on your market success between company A and company B. So I think there's still a lot of variables. I don't think we're all going towards, the idea that, well, now every color is going to be gray. It's not like that, right?
Yeah. The other thing I throw out is, digital photography did not eliminate professional photographers, even though professional photographers before they had to know about apertures and all kind of stuff. Well, now our phones do way better than a professional photographer from 1972 could do. But in 2024, we still have professional photographers. We can't, we haven't replaced. We're not, nobody's going around with it. Oh, just take it for the wedding. Yeah, I'll just use my iPhone. I mean, for the most part. So it's like people's, there's a jobs to be done practitioner who has been, I won't list his name, won't name him, but he's been really saying that, well, AI is going to replace, all the practitioners. But I don't believe that. I believe, AI is not, I heard this quote, I don't know where it's from, but it was, AI is not going to replace your job. Somebody using AI better than you might replace you.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I tend to have the same feeling because you still need to know what you're looking for. I think.
Yeah. So my question was not really about, well, I mean, maybe that's an indirect conclusion, but I didn't have in mind that we would replace people thinking about innovation. It was more about what is in innovation beyond defining the needs and then doing the engineering. It was more around that, and I think it also speaks kind of to what you were saying before, that you spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the right job is to focus on, and I think there is something to be said about that. Okay, if people had exactly the same prompt, to put it in those terms, then they would have the same thing, but probably there is a part, and that's quite interesting. There is a part of the job in terms of jobs to be done, practitioners, that is defining the right prompt. What is the prompt that you're going to look for? What is the job, the niche that you're going after? That I think needs to be a part of it.
Can I add something? So I want to go back to basically something you said at the very beginning, Jeff, and I think that's. We tend to forget this sometimes, probably as jobs development practitioners, so in the weeds of the solution. So yeah, it's important to get answers, right? To get, okay, we have these needs. Which are the ones that are not well served? I think that's important. That's relevant. Now, I hesitate to call it a secondary effect because I don't think it's necessarily a secondary effect, but an additional effect of such an effort can be the change that happens in the teams and the organization. That they change mindsets, they start thinking in a different way, they start working in a different way, they start collaborating suddenly in a different way. You mentioned language in the very beginning. Suddenly there is a language that we can actually use. So I'm much more skeptical about this AI stuff, not so much in terms of accuracy and all that kind of. Maybe, who knows? Maybe we'll get there, maybe we won't. We'll see. But it's people. It's about people. We have to take them along and we have to change how they work. And jobs to be done, I think, is a jobs to be done, study done well, and then including all the people that you can, has the power to change the way organizations work. And I think that is sometimes an underestimated kind of effect that a project like this can have, or an effort like this can have. Yeah. And jumping to the answer won't get you that change. I would heavily doubt, you mentioned, Jeff, in the credibility, right? So imagine you would come up with that framework of these 8 questions because you asked ChatGPT. How would people would that convince some? But I doubt it would have the effect that it had when you were at Microsoft. So
this is something, yeah. I noticed
the answer
this
is
also
valuable, but it's not. It's
I think people need to own the answer themselves, and I think this is any person who's done some form of service or to B2B service or consulting will have realized that people will like whatever you have to offer much more if they believe that they actually contributed to it, right? And so I think that speaks to that.
Yeah.
All right, I want to switch gears yet one more time. Let's talk about your company, Jeff. IGI Group Consulting. What kind of challenges do your clients bring you? What do you help them to get done better?
Right. Well, so most of my clients, they have pretty high level problems that they're trying to solve, and I keep it that way for a specific reason. So, I abstract it all the way up to an executive's trying to grow his company, not quite sure how to do it, or a company is trying to increase their customer satisfaction and employee satisfaction. How do we do that?
Yeah.
Or, other high level questions that often don't get verbalized or asked, like the CEO wants to be more confident in how he decides to allocate resources, or he just wants to be able to sleep better at night because he knows he's not missing anything.
Yeah.
Those types of more strategic questions. And I do essentially position myself as like a fractional chief customer officer type of a role. So I try really hard not to come in like pitching specific projects or stuff like that. I try and abstract it up because what I'm ultimately trying to do is I'm trying to help companies make better usage of customer perspective in the decisions that they make across the business. And so that not only involves collecting those perspectives, but it also involves the internal stuff about how do we make decisions and what's expected inputs for all of those decisions. Is insights even on the list, right? And then also like where the company is at culturally, like I'll use I still use something that's very close to that original framework that I built 20 years ago as like the prompt for saying, where are your knowledge gaps that are most significant to this business? And that's a lot of times where I start is saying, okay, what things are you most uncomfortable not knowing? Because that's the place where we should start defining some sort of learning agenda. And then as we do that, we're also working on the internal stuff about how to make the organization a better consumer of insight. So those are the 2 main buckets that I work on. And, occasionally there will be clients that are like, yeah, we just want to get better at innovation. That's pretty rare though. And I find that that's even more niche-y than what I'm doing, which I think of as niche-y to begin with. And so that's why I try and keep it more broad. And if it happens to lead down a path towards being better innovators, well then, yeah, we can pull out all the tools for innovation management and structure and the processes you need for that. and I can do that. But it tends to be broader than that.
So what do these engagements look like? Are these like workshops, or what do your services
Yep.
look like as you're helping them?
So here's what I do. Like hopefully most or all halfway decent consultants, I start off saying, let's get to know each other. And I do that by saying, I'm going to do some assessment tools for you and come back and help you understand where the organization is at right now with your relationship to customer insight. So like I mentioned, it's what does their existing body of knowledge look like? And I will actually synthesize through that. But even more important than that, I'll do a bunch of employee interviews and say, what are the problems that you're having trouble solving? And it's a mix. You have to approach it as a mix of, because everybody's got a few burning questions that they want answered that tend to be fairly discrete and tactical. But then I say, okay, well, let's look at these bigger picture strategic questions. And then frankly, I use an approach very similar to, what we do with the jobs to be done. How important is it for the business to know the answer to question X?
Yeah.
And how satisfied are you with your ability to answer that question today? And I use that as a means of saying, okay, here's where your most important knowledge gaps are. And then at the same time as I'm doing those employee interviews, I'll talk to them about the cultural aspects of how they use data and customer perspective, and whether or not they're comfortable with it or whether it makes them uncomfortable. Because I don't have like a model that says I'm going to insert this culture on your company. It's sort of like I need to understand where they're at first to determine what their appetite is, right? And then the other element to that is usually understanding what their capacity is, right? I think one of the things that is really easy to lose track of as practitioners in both the insights field and the innovation field, which I have come to refer to as specialty disciplines that are not for everyone and that people don't spend a lot of time thinking about, is that we get really wrapped up in the execution of those, but we sort of forget that both of those disciplines are very heavy agents of change and that be disruptive company. And so you have to be really cautious or aware of like, what's the organization's capacity to absorb all of the things that I've put into my head for the last 20 or 30 years, because you can easily, swamp people. And as soon as you do that, they're like, whoa, no, I don't want to do that. So anyway, that's a lot of what I do in the initial phase. And then I come back and I say, well, okay, based on where you've told me you're at, here's essentially some areas that we can work on. And that turns into the external stuff, which is here's a learning agenda that makes sense for you. And it might be a year or it might be 3 years to get to all of these things. But whatever it is, depending on the company, I say this is a logical way to progress. And I use that same framework to say you should do this before you do this. And again, I'm usually making some trade-offs. It's like I know I need to help them answer a couple of tactical questions because they think that's really important right now. But I just say, let's also make plenty of room for these bigger picture strategic things along the way. And then I work on the internal stuff with the employees saying, okay, here's the way to make your organization a better consumer of research. And that's more like one-on-one coaching. Sometimes we'll do like group sessions and things like that. But it basically comes down to those two buckets. And depending on how big that pile of work is and what their aspirations are, I basically just do a flat fee monthly ongoing model. Call me anytime you have a question. I can work on 1 to 2 things at a time. I can't work on 10 things at a time for you, but we're gonna chip away at this identified pile of work. And whether it's 6 months or 36 months, whatever, let's just go at it. And I try and keep it really simple. It's a flat fee. So I do that because I want people to pick up the phone. I don't want them to think, God, we've got to scope out a project. I don't know what my problem is. How can I scope out some sort of agreement? I don't want any of that. I just want them to pick up the phone because I've found that is the best way to just not only demonstrate your value, but just become part of the team. And I learned that lesson long ago. When we were at Microsoft, we were in that model. We're a centralized team and we're all assigned to different product organizations that we're virtual team members. And, I still remember to this day that we're coming up on the end of the year and the director of the mobile group, he was like, Jeff, I was looking for your review and I I realized you're not even part of our team. And like he had literally forgotten that I wasn't part of his team.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me. And I think that's the kind of relationships that I'm trying to build. It's like, I just want you to think of me as a team member and forget the virtual part. So that's kind of the way I structure it.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. Certainly the softer side of things. I don't know if that's the right word, but I mean, that's just where battles are won or lost. You, we talked about having trouble getting customers to get excited about a list of needs. Well, we can probably apply our own thinking. In their mind, it wasn't helping them to get something done they were trying to do. And so you're asking those more basic questions. Where in the organization are you usually connected? Like what are the titles or what are they responsible for?
Right. Yeah. So it's most often a CMO.
Yeah.
They're the person who recognizes that need to have more customer perspective infused into the decisions that the organization is making. Sometimes it's the CEO. Rarely it will be the research team, right? Most often there's all kinds of landmines involved in coming in as the expert on top of a team that's supposed to be the experts in something, but sometimes that works. It's like, and I do remember this, I keep using Microsoft as an example, but I do remember this too. It's like, we were a big group of professionals and we still brought in a third party to say, hey, have you thought about this? And so even when there are experts in-house, I can still help them in a way that's non-threatening.
Yeah. You have a fresh perspective.
Right.
Sure.
Exactly. It's like, I'm here to help you be better at being the essential element within your company. Right. I can still do that. And then sometimes the one thing that I haven't mentioned is sometimes I will just be the guy who takes on some special project that is fairly high level, that doesn't really have an owner, or even if it should have an owner, that person has no time to do it. And so I'll like work with that person to do something exploratory and help them understand some new market, some new problem that they're worried about on the horizon or something like that.
Yeah. Interesting. At the end of a regular qualitative interview, we all have these questions. We ask the same one, so I'll ask the same one that I always ask. Jeff, what should we have asked you about that we didn't?
Let's see. I don't know. I think we've covered an awful lot. I really wanted to make sure that we touched on that whole element of what the value proposition of jobs to be done is, and how it's really much broader than just the innovation advocates inside of a single product team. It's much bigger than that. And so I'm glad we covered that. But I mean, other than that, I think we even touched on some of the things like how could we make jobs to be done better? I mean, I think it's pretty hard. Like you said it early on. It's like, hey, this works and it has been stable for a long time. And it should be given credibility for that, for how quickly fads come and go. And, if I hear the word fail fast one more time, I'm just going to tear my hair out. I mean, my God, what a cop out that is. So anyway.
How did we get addicted to that? Like what was the...
Yeah. It's a way to make people feel good about doing the wrong thing. That's what it is. Yeah. It's like, and here's the thing, it's actually a misapplication of something that Jonathan, you were saying. It's like, once you get to a point where you know what direction you're heading in, then iterate quickly. And if some of those iterations are failures, that's okay, right? But don't just go blindly and start failing rapidly, right? And that's what's essentially become the mantra. Like that's what was originally intended. And I actually don't think that was the original intent. That's how some of these fads are so distracting to organizations. They just go from one fad to the next. And I think that's a real sad phenomenon.
Yeah.
But it sort of goes back to what we're talking about. It's like people are incented to come up with something new or stand out by being the leader on this topic or this new thing. And it's just that's wrong. I wish there was some clear incentive system for just solid, consistent execution of a great idea, right?
Yeah. Most of the people I've heard say fail fast, I mean, they'll, the individuals, they never seem like real deep thinkers to me on the topic. They seem like they'll say it and they'll sit back like you hear that smart thing I said. It's like
I hear you. I know.
Well,
I struggle with very similarly with the whole phrase around net promoter. And
Yeah.
that's more of just a general purpose research thing. But man, I just believe how popular that is and how equally often it is just completely misused. And
I think I've
even,
ever only heard criticism of the NPS. I
yeah,
rarely have I ever
Whoa.
heard anyone come out and say, well,
yeah.
on Twitter at least, I don't know, or on social
Well,
media,
yeah,
never come out and
that's
say, wow,
because,
I love this.
yeah,
It's always,
right.
oh, I hate this.
Yeah, yeah.
How
That's
often
because,
would you promote Net Promoter
yeah,
Score? Probably
yeah.
zero, I guess. Yeah.
That's because it's a convenient thing for executives to say, oh yeah, we use Net Promoter. That's some code for, oh, we're customer driven, we're customer centric, blah blah
That's
blah.
right.
But they have no idea what they're actually doing.
No.
They got to
And
have
even in
something.
yeah,
I mean, that's
yeah,
something to put in their annual report. It makes it sound like they're doing something. There's
right,
a job to be
exactly.
done around there about
Yeah,
communicate
yeah,
this
Yeah.
appearance of doing insights and things.
right.
They'll put
Yes.
in there whatever they can.
Oh, that's for
Sometimes
sure.
they put jobs to be done in there too, which is nice. Whether they're doing it or not, it's a different question.
Yeah, that's right.
But all right. Well, you can learn more about Jeff's company at igigroupconsulting.com or connect with Jeff on LinkedIn. Jeff, one final question. We're putting on a Jobs to Be Done conference, and you're in charge of entertainment. There's an evening, and everybody at the conference, we're all going to watch a movie together. This can be related thematically to the conference, or it can be just for entertainment. You get to decide what movie are we watching at your conference.
Oh, good Lord. Okay, so my answer is going to be completely polluted by the coincidental fact that I have some friends who are way more into Halloween and watching scary movies than I am, even though I kind of enjoy that, but they're just nuts about it. And so
Yeah.
I finally realized in order to talk to them, I have to come up with my own list of like favorite scary movies. And so that's what I did that literally last week. So that's probably all I have in my head. Um, So I would pick, and I don't like slasher movies. I like movies that just are just weird, right?
Yeah.
So at the top, pretty much at the top of my list was Hereditary because it's so unsettling.
Yeah.
If you guys haven't seen that one, you definitely should.
I haven't.
Now, okay, so that was the first thing that came to mind. I don't think that strikes me as a very good answer to your question, though. So I would also default to things that are much more inspirational. Like I'm a huge fan of like A River Runs Through It, or even like a couple of old classics. Most old classics don't hold up well, but like I could watch Casablanca any day of the week and go, that's a great movie, right? Something that sort of has some element of positivity to it that, you know, the group can rally around, I think would be a good choice.
Yeah, I think that would be fun. We'll go to your conference and watch Casablanca.
Okay.
Well, Jeff, I appreciate the time today. You know, it's there's just there's a group of us that, you know, worked for Strategyn back in the day, and it was a fun place to be because we just, I don't know, we could have these conversations not that different than what we're having now, and sort of beat up on the process and try to improve it, come to the conclusion that we couldn't. It was pretty good as it was, but I learned, it was such a great education for me personally, working with you and all the folks there. It's been great to have this podcast as an excuse to get back in touch and
yeah.
I appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. I've really enjoyed the conversation, guys. Yeah.
Awesome. That, friends, concludes today's Product Quest podcast. Follow us on LinkedIn. Reach out to us anytime at productquestpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, dude.
Very nice.